Discovering Asian dramas back in 2018 was an enlightening moment for me, and I've never looked back. I enjoy talking about them just as much as watching them, so much so that I decided to create a podcast with a heavier focus on Chinese dramas but passing through Korean, Japanese, Thai, and Filipino dramas. Welcome to the Tea and Soju Asian Drama Podcast, your corner for drama talking. For more tea and soju content, consider joining Patreon, where I release extra reviews and polls. Everything is linked in the episode description. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Tea and Soju Asian Drama Podcast. I'm your host, Liliana, and in today's episode, we're going back to the guest series. And today is a special day because we've got not only one, but two guests, and I will let them introduce themselves. So, Sarah, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah. For those of you who are Chinese speakers, 大家好，我是 Sarah. And I post on www.kdramalist.com. So I have review blogs, and I'm also on Instagram a lot, and on Twitter at kdramalist.
And then for our next guest, Leah.
Hello, I am Leah Riley, and I am a co-host of a K-drama podcast, Afternoona Delight, and also a co-host on a BTS podcast now, Afternoona Army, because we are just like networking out over in Afternoona land. And yeah, I'm based in California and really excited to talk a little bit about how I've been expanding my Asian entertainment.
Yeah, because that's, it's always fun when people go from like watching one country to then watching a couple more. It's like you broaden your horizons so much more. So I think this is going to be a really good episode for us to sit down and have a little chat. So I've written down some questions. And my first question is, and I think I know the answer for Leah at least. I'm not sure I know the answer for Sarah on this one. So, which was your first Chinese drama?
So what I didn't mention in the in my intro is that I'm actually British Chinese. My parents are from Hong Kong, so technically my first Chinese drama was probably from when I was a child, because we watched a lot of Hong Kong dramas back in the day, and we would borrow them on VHS tapes and binge them kind of as long as, as many VHS tapes as we could, and then you'd have to return to the store and get the next set. So all of my evening viewing that I did with my parents, so I could stay up and watch TV with them as long as it was the Hong Kong TV. So I couldn't like request my own like Western TV, because my mum would be like, this is the time we all sit down and watch Chinese TV. So but I was lucky. I grew up in the 80s, which is like the Hong Kong golden period of drama. So it's a lot of the old school Hong Kong actors that are quite famous, like Zhou Yunfat, and actually latterly Michelle Yeoh and Tony Leung, who was in Shang-Chi, the Marvel movie. They all came out of Hong Kong kind of TV and film at this period. So it was a really great time to be a Chinese drama viewer, or Hong Kong Chinese drama viewer at that time. But in terms of like modern kind of day, so like since I started picking up Asian dramas again during lockdown, my first actual full one that I finished, because I've started quite a few and then they just didn't catch me, and I'd go back to like my K-drama safe zone. But the full one that I actually finally managed to finish was my brain is not working. I was just like, I didn't actually write this down because I was thinking it's so obvious.
It Love Between Fairy and Devil?
So it's actually You Are My Glory. You Are My Glory.
Oh, yes, I do know the one with Yang Yang and Dilraba.
Yeah, Dilraba, yeah, exactly, that one. So that was my I kind of finished it because I got recommended it, and so many people love this drama, right? I think we had a brief chat about it.
We did, yeah.
And I kind of kept watching it thinking like, okay, I'll soon discover why people love this so much. And then I kind of never did. So really, in retrospect, it would have been one of those ones I dropped because I did not really enjoy it very much. Sorry to those of you who are.
It is one of those dramas where the main appeal for it is the fact that it is two of the biggest people in Chinese drama land right now. And I think that's, it really drove it. If the story had been shorter, then great. It could have worked for me. I liked it okay, but it wasn't like something that I was completely, absolutely in love with, like a lot of people were. And just going back to your point, I haven't watched barely anything for out of Hong Kong, but I've heard that it's a very different style to mainland China. And so that's something I actually want to go more into, this year. I want to try out some more not Chinese dramas and movies out of Hong Kong. But yeah. And Leah, what was your? I think I know the answer for yours, but tell us, what was your first Chinese drama?
Look, I'm going to be the very basic one in this. I'm not in any like unusual goals here. I am a C-drama baby, but interestingly enough, my first drama before I got into like my K-drama obsession was a C-drama. I got into a couple of C-dramas, and the first one for me was Meteor Garden. And so I
Yeah.
stepped into Meteor Garden before the pandemic, actually. Like I'm trying to think when it came out, but it was pretty like, I feel like I got into it like relatively early after it released to Western audience. I don't know what it was that made me watch it, but I remember like starting it and being completely gobsmacked that every romance trope I could ever think of was somehow in this one drama. And it was like to my great delight, from Stranded on a Desert Island to Amnesia, let alone like Enemies to Lovers and Coming of Age. So I was just like, I cannot believe they've thrown the kitchen sink at this. And I am so entertained and it's working. And I actually got my Afternoon Delight co-host Megan to watch it with me. And this was before we were into any Asian dramas. And so I was just like, you have to watch this. It's bananas. Like every romance trope, because I guess I should preface, we're romance writers. So we actually care about this. And so I was like, I don't know how this is happening. And then what's even more funny is I got my son and his friends to watch it. And they were like probably in like year 5. And they got obsessed with it. And so it became this thing where like our entire neighborhood got sucked into watching Meteor Garden. And I don't know. And then what was funny is I was like, well, I know it's based on like Boys Over Flower. And I also am well aware this is like a story that's gone to like, I think it's originated in Taiwan. Is that correct? Like the Boys
Yeah.
Over Flower trope has like been beaten like a dead horse. And so I was like, I guess I could look at the K-drama version, and I pulled it up and I saw Lee Min Ho's perm
Oh
thing.
God.
I was like 100% out, and don't even want to start it, which I have since started and I have big feelings on. But I was like, I'm out. And I ended up watching one more C-drama, and then I kind of like went back into like regular watching of like whatever else I was on, which I think was mostly BBC Masterpiece Theater.
If Chinese dramas will throw every single trope into dramas, if you want bonkers plot, they will give you. But I mean, I've recently just finished one which is called My Lethal Man. And I kid you not, that drama is insane. Just the fact that the male lead gets supposedly killed in a car crash. No, he doesn't. He gets chucked off a cliff. He survives. He then returns because he wants his company back, his family's company back. And he falls in love with the doppelganger of his sister. I mean, yeah, exactly. You want crazy?
That's a great twist.
I was going to say that sounds like it's right up Leah's street.
Oh, you need to go watch it then. Trust me on this.
Princess Light meets plot armor sounds pretty good.
It's insanity, but actually the chemistry between the main couple works so well. And actually there's a lot of growth in both the characters. And I'm like, this is the kind of drama that you watch almost with your brain turned off a little bit, but it's complete escapism. I was hooked. I sat there and binged 8 episodes in one go, and then I was like all caught up, and then I had to wait for more to air. And everybody has since gone and fallen in love with the male lead from the show because he's very charismatic. He constantly wears these like neckties that people are like, I did not know neckties could look this good in the 21st century. So everybody, yeah. I think Leah might appreciate that one. So Right. So for my next question, I've got what surprised you when watching Chinese dramas? And that can be, positive, negative, if you had any expectations or any prejudices before you went in. So what did you think, Sarah?
Like I said, I'm coming from a slightly different place, obviously having kind of grown
Yeah.
up with Hong Kong and Chinese dramas. And actually we did have quite a few mainland dramas that would generally get dubbed into Cantonese, so we have seen them. But I think generally, obviously, production has upped its game, CGI is huge. So that has really made a difference. Although there's kind of like a good and a bad to it, right? So some kind of more old school wuxia. So this is the kind of martial arts fantasy dramas, historical fantasy dramas. They actually think that modern day wuxia is not as good because they don't properly learn to fight. They're not on wires. They're not doing proper sword combat because they CGI so much stuff into it. So they don't actually look like people who can, like proper warriors and heroes that can actually fight. Whereas obviously in the old school days, and you had some of the amazing, like the guy that choreographed the Matrix fight scenes was a Hong Kong choreographer. So he's coming out of that stable of working with all the greats like Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, of having all these really complex great fight scenes. And there's a feeling among those fans that's kind of disappeared a bit. So that's one of the things. The other thing probably for me that has been a massive difference is having so many more strong female characters. So I think that when I was growing up, I felt like, I mean, we did have some strong female characters, but often the heroine was just really, like, she was just the really good, godly kind of, like, she had all of the virtues. She was like crazy beautiful and everybody loved her. And that was like the heroine, and now we're seeing much more of flipping those tropes, having tomboys, having people that are slightly gray in their moral character being the leads. So it's which is obviously a really welcome change for a culture that is still very Confucian in its tradition.
I find your point on wuxia really interesting because this is something I've kind of like been researching and trying to dig more into, because a lot of dramas nowadays get slapped with the wuxia like tag on it, but they aren't true wuxia dramas. So basically, I follow this YouTuber. She's called Avenue X, and she's like a godsend for international fans. She's Chinese but lives in Canada, and she used to work in the Chinese, movie entertainment business behind the scenes and everything. So she knows a lot. And she says that basically the style of fighting that they even use in modern, wuxia dramas isn't actually, what wuxia is meant to be. So I find that really interesting, and that's something I do want to go more into at some point, because I actually want to do a couple of episodes on specific like genres. Wuxia is not a genre I tend to watch a lot of, but it is something that I'm really interested in, especially like I really want to watch an old wuxia drama and like compare it and see what it looks like to what what they do to in modern day time.
Well, I do have a rec for that, so if you wanna if you want one from me, I can definitely recommend old school retro wuxia dramas.
Please do, because I definitely want to go and try that out and see where I just want to compare it, because I want to get the real feel of what wuxia is meant to be. So, but it doesn't, I mean, I think eventually the whole wuxia will get a shake up, because that's what's happening in fantasy right now. It's getting a huge shake up in, the way they film, the way, the episode count, everything. And it's changing for the positive. So I'm hoping that, wuxia will get the same shake up. There's always a lot happening in Chinese drama land, but yeah, we shall see. What about you, Leah? What surprised you when watching Chinese dramas?
So I'll say I don't want to make big generalizations because I have not seen enough to. But I will say that, for anyone who's listening, who's like, okay, I'm interested in expanding like my viewing, but when I like click over to Chinese dramas, what I would imagine would give someone hesitancy is the same thing that gives me hesitancy over and over, which is the amount of episodes you see. And so, right now I'm like, I'll be like, okay, if I'm going to watch like a K drama and it's like 20 episodes, I know I'm going to like, that's going to be a beefy investment of time. And yes, I can be very irresponsible in watching, but that's not always good for me. And so when you see something's like 53 episodes or something like that, it's like, but then my caveat being that what I knew in Meteor Garden, because this was the thing I like when I was in my Meteor Garden like obsession, I was like, watch this, and people would be like, oh my God, no, that's so many episodes. And I was like, they're so short. And they spend a lot of time recapping at the beginning. So by the time you do your recap and like your theme, like intro, and they're short, like you're really just kind of like hooning through these a lot. So that's just like a thing I would put out there that like it gets me a lot is that I'll have this sticker shock of seeing the amount of episodes. And then every time I watch, I'm like, oh, this actually goes very fast because you're not looking at like the same model necessarily as you might be in a Korean drama. I've seen actually a lot of Thai BLs doing the similar thing where there's still many episodes shorter, but like I'll be like, oh, I'm going to invest like 50 minutes in watching this like Thai episode. And then I'll be like, oh, that was actually like 30 minutes of content, all the like filler that they're putting in.
And also, there is something. I did a guest episode, I think, last week, and the guest that I had on was Porma from Dramas Over Flowers, and she mentioned something that I hadn't picked up because I started with Chinese dramas. That was my first Asian drama, and I didn't make it into Korean dramas, well until later on. So, and also my first ever Chinese drama was 63 episodes long, so I was like right into the deep end, and I binged that in 3 days. I don't know what sleep was in those 3 days, but so I was, I jumped right into the deep end. But what she mentioned was because there is no set number of episodes. I mean, with Korean dramas, you get 12 episodes or 16. There's very much a pattern when it comes to like maybe romance and stuff like that, but with Chinese dramas that changes up because it can be 10 episodes, it can be 24, it can be 30, it can be 36. There's like lots of different amounts of episodes, and that can actually mean that the formula they use happens in unexpected ways, in a sense. I mean, the same beats are still there when it comes to like a romance drama, but they're just placed at different places because it's different episode counts. And they have actually put a ban because censorship likes to, rule over everything in Chinese entertainment. They have actually put something into place where no drama is supposed to be longer than 40 episodes. That's it, 40 episodes, and they're not supposed to go over that. Now, they just went, oh, you want 40 episodes? That's fine. We'll just do a part 1 and a part 2. It's still 40 episodes, they're just divided, and now you have a 60 episode divided into 2, which they literally air back to back, no space in between. So it's like they're still airing the same thing, it's just they call it part 1 and part 2, and like censorships are like, okay, yeah, we're good with that, go ahead. And it's like it's the same thup. It's just that, but that's how censorship works. It's one of those things. So up next on my questions, I've got was there anything you hadn't seen in previous Asian dramas you watched that like you saw in Chinese dramas? So like anything to do with like writing or the style they used or anything like that at all?
So I think for me, the obvious difference is well, I think Love Between Fairy and Devil is a really good example of this, right? So this kind of really quite epic scale historically fantasy drama. There isn't really a more direct comp for this in K dramas and other Asian dramas. And obviously there is a whole cultural kind of background to both wuxia and to xianxia, which other cultures don't necessarily have. So I think that's probably for me one of the bigger the biggest differences. So to get that kind of epic scale, and all of those kind of historical fantasy elements that you get in a Chinese drama, they're quite, for me, quite unique to C-dramas.
Yeah, I think when it comes to there was this very big discussion online about alchemy of souls and love between fairy and like the xianxia genre in general. And so there was a big discussion how the Hong sisters got influenced by xianxia, because there's things that are very particular to Chinese fantasy because it's based on a whole, mythology and a whole set of, stories and everything. So there's like certain beats that are definitely like you can tell straight away that's Chinese fantasy. And there was this whole discussion online that basically went into how Chinese dramas, Chinese fantasy needs to learn from alchemy and souls. And I was like, not quite. There was a whole like fight that almost broke out online between like Korean drama watchers and Chinese drama watchers, and I'm like, why can't we all just enjoy it and like have fun with it? But yeah, I definitely agree. Like the epic love fantasy stories, China does those really, really well. And I think it is because it's so based into like, the mythology of it. Some of my favorites are, in the xianxia genre. So yeah. How about you, Leah? Did you anything that you hadn't really seen before?
I'll say so, I do like watching again, like I haven't seen any like real I haven't watched Alchemy of Souls yet. We're planning to do Alchemy of Souls 1 and 2 coming up on the pod. So I will be, but it tends what I've observed so far tends to be like more paranormal related or what I would consider to be just like straight historical. I haven't seen there have been times where there have been like fantasy elements in a historical I've seen, like Mr. Queen with body swapping and stuff, but that has nothing to do with like kind of like this high fantasy. I would argue, like I would call this high fantasy that we're going into this world of complete magic. And I also just want to give a shout out to the time frames that they're operating on when they're like, well, I've been doing this for like 50,000 years or something. And I was trying to like calculate like humanity, like how long have we been like out of caves and like eating with fire? Because these time frames are really expansive.
They're so big. They're so big. And I think that's like something. So when it comes to like the xianxia genre in general, there's this very common theme where the female lead starts off as this very almost childlike, person of sorts, and that is something that you will see often happening. And then people will question, especially if you're new to Chinese fantasy, people will come in and they will be like, wait, why is it that the characters seem so childish, but yet they're like thousands of years old? And you have to like compare it and say, well, those characters are like a 2 or 3-year-old to in human years almost. So it definitely makes a difference when you're doing it in that way. But I feel like when it comes to that, they do tend to have a very good arc throughout it, so I quite enjoy I'm a very big fan of Chinese fantasy in general. So, I'm literally watching 2 new ones that have come out at the same time. So, you can say I quite enjoy it. So for my next question, I've got, as non-regular Chinese drama watchers, what were some hesitations you had before going in, and how have those changed?
So I think Leah's already mentioned length of dramas, and I think that's still probably a bit of a blocker for me, even despite having the very super long credits and end credits and it chopping off. So that's still a additional thing for me. But then also there's a slight flabbiness, I think, often to Chinese dramas. They often, for me, kind of cover some of the side characters in a lot more detail than perhaps I'm interested in or perhaps the plot needs. So there's this kind of sometimes it feels like you're wading through quite a lot more stuff when actually you just want to get back to the leads and just find out what's happening, with their story. I think the other thing is kind of what I would call soft politics, really. So I think You Are My Glory is a really good example of this. So the first half of the drama is basically like an extended advert for Tencent's like mobile phone game. And like kudos to the production team for actually making people playing a flipping mobile game semi-exciting and so they had some e-game kind of like scenes and stuff, and it was kind of exciting, but ultimately freaking hell, it's just people playing this game on their phone. And then the second half of the drama, they junked that, right? So that plot line went and it became like a slightly extended propaganda advertisement for how good the Chinese space race is going. And so you have Yang Yang like say in his character that in a decade they will be overtaking the US in terms of their like capacity to put whatever they were putting on the moon or like in the sky or the satellites or whatever. So like for me I find it quite difficult for me to divorce that, and obviously I'm probably a bit more aware of Chinese politics than the average viewer. Like I did it as my major. I was an elected politician. So Chinese politics, and obviously, there's been a lot going on in Hong Kong politics recently. So there is a real, split in, within even just my family and friends of like who is pro-China and who is anti-China. And so there's a lot more awareness of that, and I carry that into the drama. And it's very difficult to kind of escape, and part of the reason why I like Asian dramas is to get away from that world and to not have that world. So I mean, it's a push-pull thing, because there's things that I think that K-dramas cover in terms of politics and some of the social commentary that they can make about the government, about elected officials and stuff like that that can be done in Chinese dramas, but it has to be done in a way that makes you think, like, are they actually able to creatively say what it is that they're trying to say? No. Or they're just, having to work their plots and what they're saying around censorship and assuming that you're going to have to read between the lines of what they're actually trying to say.
I think that is one thing that, you just can't get around, because censorship is very much there, politics is very much there, and I mean, you very rarely get a bad guy who doesn't end up in custody or in prison or whatever. That's just because the police are really good at their jobs or stuff like that. Are they really? Maybe not, but there's just certain things that dramas need to do to get over that censorship bump. Now, if there is, I think there is only one time where I've been like, well, censorship has actually helped this drama be better, and that was the I think it's 2021. There's a drama called One and Only, and then there's like a second part to it, which is Forever and Ever. One and Only is a historical set, like it's a tragedy, and Forever and Ever is a modern set drama. Now, these are based on a book, and in the book, the historical part is barely an afterthought. It barely exists. The female lead is actually reincarnated, and she remembers all of her past life. So she meets up with the reincarnation of her past love, and she remembers everything. Now, censorship doesn't want reincarnation, so they're like, no, you can't have that. So they actually had the author of the original book come in. They were the screenwriter for the drama, and they split the drama in two. So there's One and Only, which is the historical part, Forever and Ever, and it's done so well. There's like little links that just link the whole story together. Now, would that have happened if they could have just passed it with reincarnation? Maybe not, but that is probably the only time where I've been like, well, this may have worked in their favor. Unfortunately, it is one of those things where you can't get away. And also, I think with Chinese dramas, there is so many of them. Like in December, I think there was like 27 dramas that premiered, and in January there was like almost 30 again. They're just constantly churning them out, and maybe 2 or 3 are really, really good and the rest aren't that great. So you end up thinking, you kind of almost need somebody to like tell you, no, do this one, these are the good ones, ignore the rest. So yeah, I can totally get, but I would totally see where you're coming from, because you're way more tuned into the politics and what's happening behind the scenes than international viewers, or even maybe some home viewers would be. How about you, Leah? Was there anything, that you was a hesitation? Obviously the episode length and that, but was there anything else?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to use the word hesitation, but a couple of things I'll speak to. One is, and this has nothing to do with like how I was interacting with dramas or choosing, but I just want to acknowledge something Sarah was saying, which is interesting because culturally, I have zero Asian in my family background. I am 100% European American immigrant to the US. But when trying to get folks to watch different dramas, I do have quite a few friends who live in various Asian countries and always are watching K-dramas. And so when I was like, oh, you need to watch Love Between Fairy and Devil, this was so good. There was a very clear, I will not watch a Chinese drama as of, not because of the length, but because simply there's like big feels about China right now in lots of different areas. Yeah. And so look, I'm not commenting on that, like pro, con, whatever. I just wanted to say that that was a reality that I had not seen before in trying to like shill dramas on people. And so, but yeah, and I would say for me, being in the US where, I wouldn't say that like Chinese US relationships are like awesome right now. It makes me more curious because I also understand that like, while you can't like, nobody should watch like Die Hard and be like, now I understand what the US is all about.
Yeah.
However, I do think in consuming a culture's media, you can extrapolate like some things. And so I think that anyone who is like subjected to watching like the Hollywood machine or just like, all the different shows that are coming out right now from the US, like, yeah, you can kind of be like, oh, I have like some themes I've noticed that must be of some like, norming within the society, da 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 da. And so I feel like the same way now with like China, especially as our news starts to get more like hashtag balloon gate like 2023, I'm like, yeah, I'm open to watching more from places that maybe we're having like tensions with, because I just think it's a good idea to just kind of be like more aware like holistically of like what a place is about. But I have noticed also being in a country that's seen as more of like a superpower type country, and then having I'm married to an Australian Canadian, and I'm kind of well aware within like the Western world where like the US flexes, and then we have other countries that are kind of like, is also noticing that like sometimes in K-dramas, there's a lot of controversy with when something is shown and it's given credit to China, and people are like, no, this is Korean. You know what I mean? So I've just been aware and interested of dynamics, which I'm not a part of, but if I like extrapolate my experience over to being on the side where like I'm on kind of like a country that flexes its weight a lot in like the Western world, and other countries are like, hang on a second, like we're here too, and we're important, and we have like our own situations, and you need to respect that. I've just found that whole thing kind of like an interesting juxtaposition, basically.
Yeah, you were speaking about like inter-country relationships and whatnot. One that's always very, I mean, Korea and China aren't on their best footing. I mean, China is not on their best footing with a lot of countries in general. But one, for example, and I mentioning this because it's something that affected a drama. So basically, China and Japan have always had very strained relations. There's a lot of history there. There's, a lot of bad blood between the two countries. And one of the things that happened was there was a drama that came out, and you can't actually find it anywhere now. And that drama was the clothing. It was set in a I can't remember what dynasty it was meant to be set in, but the clothing was very memorable of like Japanese clothing as opposed to Chinese clothing. And because of that, I don't know how it got past censorship. It did, But when it was on air, there was a lot of talk. And one of the key points that kept coming up and was trending constantly in China was the fact that these clothes looked like, you know, more traditional Japanese clothes rather than Chinese clothes. And people actually frowned upon that, you know, as Chinese people in China frowned a lot upon that. And one thing I will say is that it is changing, but for example, for Korean dramas, they tend to look at international viewers as well, whereas China doesn't necessarily need to do that. It's such a large country that just from their home base alone, they can take, you know, a lot of money coming in from, you know, China alone. So they look at what people are saying in China for their main, you know, a lot of dramas are produced for Chinese people in China. So I think, you know, and there was a huge drama last year, and I'm forgetting the name of it. But the one of the posters, the female lead, Love Like the Galaxy, the female lead had a big bow. I don't know the proper name for it, but it had a big bow on the back of it, and it was seen as, you know, Japanese. And within a couple of days, all of those posters were taken down and new posters were brought in where the bow was just completely gone. And they went through the whole drama, and every scene that she had been wearing that specific clothing, they scrapped the whole bow. So they went in and like literally took the bow out of every single scene. And it was, you know, so it's, you know, stuff like that. It
Or if I can speak
happens
to
all
like
the time.
Ghost and Exorcist. So Ghost and Exorcist came out in 2021. It was getting a lot of hype as it was coming out, and it aired
Yeah.
two episodes before getting canceled due to the backlash from a lot of Korean viewers over you know, what were, you know, I never even got a chance to dip my toe in, nor would I have like been conversant in like the inaccuracies. But essentially, it was canceled over what were seen as historical accurate inaccuracies, and then also Chinese props being presented as Korean.
Uh, I always find, yeah, I remember the whole controversy about that one. And see, I think this is one of the topics that I always find really interesting, especially to like when I'm speaking to someone like Sarah who may have a way bigger grasp on it, is the fact that, for example, they will say, you know, for us international viewers, it makes no difference because we're not, at least for me personally, I am not, you know, not gonna know if that prop is from China or that prop's from, you know, Korea or from Japan or whatever. I'm just not versed in the story, you know, in the history of the countries to, you know, pinpoint that down. But with Joseon Exorcist, like the international fandom was going crazy saying, no, 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 just keep airing it. We want to watch it. Whereas the home, you know, the home fandom was like, no, 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 this needs to go. Like there's no way this you know, can be aired. And it's one of those topics that I'm always like, do we listen to, you know, the home fan base because they're coming in with, you know, the culture behind it, or do you, you know, listen to the international base? And I'm always like thinking it was the same like for Snowdrop, for example. There was a big controversy with Snowdrop. I didn't watch the drama, but that one was huge because of like the North Korea South Korea divide and the North Korea being a spy, and I don't know. But it's one of those topics that I'm always like cautious to touch on because I'm like, as an international fan, I don't know enough on the topic to like have a really really informed, you know, opinion on it.
And I would argue that we probably don't need to have an informed opinion. And I think that also like the idea is that like within the countries too, they're having these debates. Like it's not like a homogenous, like, you know, I mean, Joseon Exorcist was like a Korean drama. So people were very much like, this is fine. And then other people had different ideas. And so like a society grappling internally, I think it's interesting to watch and to listen, to learn from, but like it's not gonna really be like it's not up to me to like
Yeah.
decide where I'm falling out on that. But I do think that we can again learn a lot about, you know, where societies are tracking and like their thoughts and like their debates over the things that they're having over content creation and things like that. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm always a little bit cynical, right? Because nationalism is a populist toolkit, right? And you have it in the States with, you know, a lot of the anti-China propaganda and things. This is not an East-West thing. It's just
Populism
that
in the
it's an sorry?
And we have populism in the US? No. We have ultra nationalism? No.
So obviously it's just a very handy, if blunt, but very useful tool to whip up this kind of nationalist agenda. And right before we started the pod, we were talking about Brexit. So every country is not immune to this. So there's always an element of me, it's just like, probably the silent minority didn't really care. But like you have a government that find it a little bit useful to kind of amplify these kind of tensions. And, you had periods of time when people were boycotting Korean products in China because they decided that they just wanted to whip that up. And then sometimes it's like Japanese stuff or whatever. So I'm always a little bit like, how bothered were people, or are we just really hearing about the really bothered people being supremely bothered because it suits people, from that point of view? Or, like just you being a veteran of like enough Asian dramas to know, like it could be just some like evil guy, like with some machinations of like, I want to, take on this other media conglomerate and like do down their latest drama and just like whip up this stuff. So, I mean, I'm always a little bit like, I'm not sure how much like the everyday person really cares about this kind of stuff that much, but yeah.
Yeah, that is also, that's a really good point actually, because obviously what we get, as international viewers, what we get out of any country, even just in countries in Europe, will be very different to what people living there and experiencing it and like, will get, because we get like secondhand information almost. And that's not necessarily just from Asian countries. That's, every country, you put out what what favors you to put out almost. So it is, quite interesting to go down that route and be like, well, oh, what are we getting? How truthful is it actually? So yes. So shall we move on? That was really interesting. I don't get to touch on these subjects very often because I feel like this isn't a conversation that is due to have, by myself on the pod. So I always find it really interesting when we get to go down these routes because it's something I don't often get to, touch on. So, I feel like Leah will will find this one interesting because I feel like we should touch on dubbing because one of my questions is, which were the biggest differences you found between Chinese dramas and K-dramas? And one of them will always be, I think, dubbing, because K-dramas just aren't dubbed at all and Chinese dramas are. So, apart from that, we will touch on dubbing, but what differences did you find? Or, if you were telling somebody that doesn't really watch much Chinese dramas, what differences are the biggest that you find between Chinese, I say Korean dramas because they're the most, accessible and the ones that we tend to gravitate towards. But which ones do you think are the biggest differences between the two?
So in terms of dubbing or just in general? Okay, so in general, so look, again, I don't know enough about, like, I don't want to like come out here and make like grand sweeping statements if I'm like not coming from like a position of like deep knowledge, but I can talk a little bit on some things that I am like aware of to some degree. And then the two of you can like pull me up if I'm like taking it too far in terms of like assumptions. But one thing that I've noticed in like discussion is that there tends to be very few very few, if any, C-dramas that really get into things about like ghost stories and having like ghost type characters. That seems to be not like a very normed thing culturally to have, as well as time travel plots.
So I would say that's a political cultural thing. So ghosts are a huge part of culture in in Chinese culture, and actually some of the most famous films have ghost characters. So one of the really famous films that Leslie Chung was in was a ghost story, and the heroine is actually a ghost. So I think that's a specific mainland China kind
Yeah.
of thing of not having ghosts, not having mythology in anything that isn't just like an historical canon. So so modern day ghosts.
So yeah, what I've seen is that and this is, again, I do not know. I've just like read about this when I've been researching like other drama stuff, which will be like often you'll see a ghost potentially be figure, like if there is something like that figures, it'll end up being a dream or a figment of the imagination as opposed to being like a real ghost. And then the other thing I've seen has been not a lot of interest in time travel plots, because again, that comes from like a cultural thing of like, you don't want to value in maintaining historical legacy, and like time traveling can like muck that all up. So I don't know, because like I said, I don't know enough that if you're like, oh, well, whatever, there's like 90 of these. Sure. I'm just saying like these are the things that I've kind of like hit that I like took notes on when I was like thinking about this, that I've just seen being discussed in context against other dramas.
So the ghost ones, yes, there is not a lot. You will see ghosts here and there, but they aren't like the main focus of it. I was mentioning before one of the biggest dramas, The Untamed. The main character, he conducts ghosts almost, so they are a big plot device, but they don't necessarily, are used as the focus. So ghosts, no. Time travels, they tend to go and use more time loops as opposed to time travel. One of the biggest dramas last year is like it's called Reset, and that is a time loop. It's in modern time. You don't really see a lot of like going from modern time to any dynasty in the past. You don't see a lot of that at all, but you tend to get. So another one from last year was Love in Time, and that was also, they were jumping between 2 years, so they were going back and forth, and that was really well received as well. But yeah, Reset is definitely one of those that is it's a time loop, and that was done so well. It was one of my favorite dramas from last year. So yeah, they do a few. They don't do a lot of them. I don't think that's where their like bread and butter, so to speak, is.
I would say K-drama, it's pretty common, I've seen, to have a modern character time traveling back. And then
so like Mr. Queen, wasn't Mr. Queen a Chinese remake? Wasn't that a remake of a Chinese drama? So did they have the main heroine jump back, or sorry, the male lead? I mean, did they have it cross as well? I don't know. I don't know much. I seem to remember
Moon Lovers, actually, where Moon Lovers, like her whole thing was, I'm going to
yeah
outcome of history, so that this prince, who's known to be like the bloody prince, quote unquote, is not going to have that reality.
So
different,
yeah,
like
not a lot of people know, but Moon Lovers is actually, the original is Chinese. It's not Korean. It was adapted. And actually, the Chinese version has 2 seasons, not 1. And it has a much, from what I hear, I haven't watched it, but from what I hear, the Chinese version has a much more satisfying end to it, as opposed to the Korean. I think the thing is, what I hear, from doing like research and whatnot, what I hear is that censorship goes through like almost loops of sorts. So there'll be a period where they say, for example, no aliens, and in that time period you'll see absolutely no dramas coming through that have got aliens in. They'll swap it to it being like a fairy or whatever, and then they will do another thing that will be like no time jumps or whatever. And so for that time, and then they'll change their mind, so it keeps changing constantly, and you will see the changes by the dramas that are coming out within those couple of years. So I don't know about Mr. Queen. That would be interesting. Is it adapted? But I don't know, I'll have to look that one up.
I thought that was part of its controversy as well as some of the
and I love Splash Splash Love, which is a super short, like 2 episode, but so adorable. Yeah, that's where she goes back and like, meets King Sejong, and it's like the birth of, Korean, like the written word. And I don't know, it's just like, so I feel like there's a lot of interacting that I see happen, and like given the fact that I have zero context on C-dramas, I can't say if that happens or not. I've just seen discussions where it's not as common.
No, it's definitely not as common. And I did just look it up. Mr. Queen is based, and I had completely forgotten about this, but it is based on a Chinese drama, and it's called Go Princess Go. And there's a second season for Go Princess Go. I think it's coming out soon. I'm pretty sure I hear something about it. But they are actually working on a second season for the Chinese version. I haven't actually watched the original Chinese one, but it would be interesting to see how different it is from the Korean adaptation, because I've only watched Mr. Queen. I haven't watched the Chinese one. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Even for example, they must have like a ban on it or whatever, because there's a drama that came out last year and it's called New Life Begins, and it's based, so a lot of Chinese dramas, they are based on IP novels and, you know, just on books in general. That's just how they adapt a lot of their content. And so New Life Begins was adapted from a book, and in the book the female lead travels back to, I think, the Tang dynasty, and, you know, she's like very empowering, and, you know, she's all modern because she's from modern day. But actually, when it got adapted, they scrapped the whole time travel aspect of it, and they just made her a regular, you know, character already living in that dynasty. So they kept all of her like spunk and all of her modernness, but they just, you know, she just didn't time travel. She was already there. So I don't know. There might be. It's really hard to keep up with what censorship wants and what's, you know, it's impossible. I was looking it up because I really want to do an episode on it. And there's things on there that, like, males can't show too much emotion, or they can't be too feminine looking, or they can't. It's like, it's insane the amount of. I was like, I don't even know how dramas get past it in the first place, because the amount of rules is like, I don't understand. So, next up, I've got one that's more aimed at Sarah, because you speak, you know, the language. So, how have you found the First of all, do you watch like Chinese dramas with subs, like with English subs, or do you just not use the subs at all?
No, I do watch them with English subs. It's quite interesting actually. So I made a couple of my in real life friends watch Love Between Fairy and Devil, and they're both like me, British Chinese. But I'd say their Chinese is probably, their written Chinese is better than their reading of Chinese is better than me. So they both found it useful to have the Chinese subtitles on. I find with fantasy drama specifically, the all the different realms and all the different tribes and all the different terms, because obviously they're all very specific to the drama. Like, I struggle with like understanding what they necessarily are until I'm much further in the drama and realize what they're like. I think I'm okay with dialogue generally, but I prefer having English subtitles because it's less hard work. And, you know, the trouble is though, it can be a bit distracting because, like I said, sometimes, like, I really hate the way they translated some of the things that say, for example, Dongfang Xingtang said in Love Between Fairy and Devil. Like, I'm a huge historical romance fan, and I want to keep within that historical romance English. So I think there was like a time when he told her to go away, and I think they used a really modern day vernacular for like the English, and it really annoyed me. So then I ended up getting distracted because I'm like simultaneously translating, which is not helpful. I was just like, you know, trying to be in the drama. But yeah, in terms of dubbing, I think we were going to chat about that, weren't we?
Yes, we can.
So for me, like, so like I said, I think I mentioned before, like, I grew up kind of with dubbing. So very briefly, there is no real Chinese language. So each of the provinces speak their own version of Chinese, or their own dialect of so I speak Cantonese, Sichuan people speak Sichuanese, people in Shanghai speak Shanghaiese, and as part of Mao Zedong coming to power in 1949, he created Putonghua, which is what we call Mandarin, but is the Putonghua means the common language. So it's the language that everybody in China speaks, and it's based on the northern dialect around Beijing, which is where the Mandarins come from, because it's the court language. But actually the dialects themselves are kind of mutually unintelligible. So I can speak to somebody in Beijing in Cantonese and he won't understand me. And, you know, my brother, who is completely fluent in Cantonese but doesn't speak Mandarin, would not be able to understand him. So when I was growing up, if we had to access either Taiwanese or mainland dramas, they would all be dubbed into Cantonese. And actually that's how my parents still watch K-dramas. So they watch K-dramas that are dubbed in Cantonese because they struggle, like, you know, older people. Well, my mum says that older people can't read subtitles, like they struggle with subtitles. So like dubbing for us is quite normal and quite natural. And then there are also productions. In fact, the one that I would recommend you to watch was a wuxia production that was joint Taiwanese and Hong Kong. So half of the actors were Taiwanese and half of the actors were Hong Kong. And the Taiwanese one spoke Mandarin and the Cantonese one spoke, the Hong Kong one spoke Cantonese. And then they just dubbed over the whole set, either into Mandarin or into Cantonese, depending on which obviously domestic audience it went to. So I probably have less of a kind of like, you know, thing of it finding it weird. But definitely for me, for Love Between Fairy and Devil, like I just don't think Dylan Wong's voice, which is really lovely, but he is only 24. Like his voice just would not work for this, like, you know, 10,000-year-old like supreme moon, you know, ruler. So I think in some instances I think the dubbing artists actually really enhance the drama, and I think that's definitely one of them.
I think, like, for me personally, it depends how well the dubbing is done. There is dramas where you can tell it's completely being dubbed. Now, if you watch a lot of Chinese dramas, one thing that people will say when it comes to dubbing is that you get so used to like a certain voice from you know, whether it be a female dubber or a male dubber, that you then get into the trouble of, wait, that's not their voice, or you get used to the actor's real voice or the actress's real voice, and then in your head it doesn't match because that it doesn't, it doesn't work. So yeah, that's one of the things. Yes, Leah was saying that she has to leave us, so we will let her say her goodbyes. Thank you so much for coming and joining us in, Leah.
Thank you very much. And I feel like I'm in really good stead having Sarah hold down the fort this morning. I have to run to a dance class for a 7-year-old, but I know that we do have a lot of listeners, because I want to promote this a lot with our our podcast listeners, that they're mostly coming from this K-drama lens. So I'm really looking forward. And my request is, Sarah, if we can get some recommendations from what C-dramas like would be really great ones, and like some comp versions. I think I'm looking forward to hearing that. And I'm also really looking forward to sharing that with our listeners, because look, more dramas means more joy, and that's what I'm all about. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and I would honestly love to have more. I would actually love to do like a pod at some point where we do like, let's watch a K-drama and then like its Chinese counterpart, and then like, discuss it.
Let's do this. I really like this idea, and there's quite a few that we can do that with. So I feel like this would be a really, really good episode. I'm going to put this one down, and then we can discuss this.
The beginning of a wonderful friendship. I'm looking
for sure. Thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you so much, and I hope that I can't wait to catch the rest of this when it's airing. So see you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Right, so I was saying about the dubbing. I think, like, for me, it depends how well it's hidden almost. There's this one drama that I'm basically watching right now, and they the character's name is, and I'm probably gonna butcher it, but she's called Chong Zi, and there is like apparently like they use her name at the beginning to mean like I don't know, an insect, a bug of almost.
Oh, okay, yeah, 虫子, yeah, or
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
or like, yeah.
And then what happens is, in that drama, basically the male lead comes in and he says her name, but he says it with a slight different, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like just,
Tone.
yeah, a different tone. That's the word I'm looking. And it changes the whole name, and he
Yeah.
attaches this like beautiful, you know, name to her. And I'm like, this is why this language is, you know, quite difficult, because to me, I was listening to it and I was really paying attention, because I was like trying to focus really hard to just, you know, attach and listen for that tone change, and I could not pick it up. Whereas I'm sure for a Chinese audience, they would be able to instantly pick up, you know, that tone difference, and, you know, be able to tell the difference between the name change. But I think this is one of those things that for international audiences, it a lot of the time will be like, but it sounds the same. And like for home audiences, they'll be like, no, it is not the same. Like there's so much difference. And I think going back to Dylan Wang, now I don't speak Chinese, Mandarin, any, you know, any of the counterpart Cantonese. I wish. I'm trying to learn, but it is hard work.
It is hard. It's very hard.
It is. But I can tell, like I was listening to Dylan Wang behind the scenes, and he's got a really, I can't remember where he's from, but
He's from Sichuan.
He's got a really thick accent, doesn't he? Like, is that common from that area?
Yeah, I mean, I actually find it okay. Like you can tell that he's got an accent. I mean, just similar in the same way that my Mandarin is Cantonese accented. It's quite hard to kind of actually lose it. So I actually don't find his accent that thick. I mean, partly so Deng Xiaoping was the leader before Mao. And sorry, after Mao, not before Mao, after Mao.
Yeah.
And he is famously from Sichuan. And if you fancy it, you can play some clips back. So they've got audio of him, and he has got the strongest Sichuanese accent ever. It's almost unintelligible. It's actually set as an advanced Chinese comprehension test, really? Because it's like so hard to understand. And so like compared to him, Dylan's like really got quite a neutral accent. So like I think it's, yeah, but I think it's clear that he, you know, he does have one, and he doesn't have, like, because I think Esther Wu in contrast, sorry, her name's Esther Yu, isn't it? Not Esther Yu.
Yeah.
So Esther Yu, in contrast, has really good kind of almost like CCTV kind of like the classic kind of normalized Putonghua Mandarin accent. So in contrast, I think he sounds like even stronger.
Yeah. See, this is fascinating to me to listen to, because obviously, like, as an international viewer, I won't pick up on those changes. But, you know, I think when I first came across dubbing, and people often ask, why are they dubbed? And, like, one of the main reasons is money, because, you know, money. And it's a lot cheaper to call in a voice actor who is proficient in it and can literally get it all done in one take.
Yeah.
And you and I spoke about the and I'm forgetting his name.
Wang Baosheng.
Yeah, the voice actor that did Dylan Wang's character in Love Between Fairy and Devil. And like, he's basically in a little tiny studio, and he has to put all of that emotion into that character, and all he has is a screen in front of him playing the scenes. And like, you put most actors in that, you know, scene in the same setting, and they won't be able to bring out the emotion they have to for, you know, that scene to land. And it's, you know, that a lot of these are filmed in, I'm gonna butcher this, but they're filmed in a big studio. It's like Hengdian studio in China, and you can have literally like 3-4, there's 10 studios on one lot, and you can have like 3-4-5 dramas being recorded at the same time, and it's impossible to not have any like crossover. So the audio sometimes is just not, you know, you can just simply not use it. And they it's so much cheaper for them to bring in a, you know, voice actor who can do the takes than to keep on the actual actor especially if they're not proficient in, you know, the language and whatnot. But have you heard that there's another new rule? They came out with a rule that basically, if the actor cannot provide what the director is looking for in terms of voice, or, you know, voice performance, or the accent that they're looking for, the actor themselves have to pay for the voice actor to come in and do it.
Wow.
But like, this won't affect big stars, because for big stars that's like
it's no big deal.
pocket change for them. They'll just pay it and move on to the next drama to get their next paycheck. So, you know, and actually, in a lot of modern day dramas, you are I'm finding that there's no dubbing at all.
So I've heard this. Yeah,
it's becoming less and less used in later on dramas, you know, modern day dramas. But I feel like even with, you know, I keep comparing it with Korean dramas, but with Korean dramas, when you hear like a Joseon set drama, the Korean sounds very different to the modern time Korean. And the thing is, with China, there is thousands of years of history there that, you know, and every dynasty has a slight different, I don't even know how, you know, voice actors do it, because I feel like I've gotten to the point where I don't mind dubbing as long as it's done really well on camera, because I really appreciate the work that a voice actor does behind the scenes to like make that character what it is. I mean, your voice is an acting tool just as much as your, you know, body or whatever, and just a lot of actors and actresses just aren't proficient using that tool of theirs. So
no, I definitely would argue that Dongfang Jingchang would hit differently if he was not voiced by Wang Baoshen and actually was done by Dylan Wong's own voice, because it's just that depth and that kind of history and that kind of like that kind of that kind of feeling of like, this is someone who's been around for a long time and is super powerful.
I just don't think Dylan Wong would be able to bring that across. And who knows, he may, in, you know, good few years time, when he's practiced and his voice is more diverse,
when he finally hits 30
and his voice changes completely, that might be
matures a little bit more.
When that voice of his changes, then, you know, he may be able to do it himself. But dubbing is always one of those topics that a lot of viewers will bring up, and I've had people who kind of like message me about it, and they kind of ask, you know, why is it needed? Because especially if you're coming from a K-drama background, then, you know, it never happens in Korean dramas, I don't think. So it's very jarring to come across, and then in Chinese dramas, like, you see it. And the thing is, like I said, if it's done really well, you don't even notice that it's happening until, you know, you stumble across one that like the line delivery doesn't match up with the lips, and then you're like, you know, you can see that there's something there. So right, what other questions have
did you want to cover this, because you took the screenshots from...
I did. Right, there is one thing, I almost forgot about it. There is one thing, it was a big debate, and it is from Love Between Fairy and Devil. It's from episode 9, because this is the iconic scene that everybody knows. And
love that scene.
Yeah, I love that scene. That scene is like, do you know, before that scene, I was watching it and I was like, oh, okay, you know, it's okay. It's a good drama, but it's okay. And then that scene came and I was like, oh, no. I get it now. This is, you know, this is great. And it's basically the scene where, oh my god, I'm having a brain moment. Basically the scene where our female lead is being punished and our male lead comes in and, you know, rescues her. And he says a very iconic line, which for, you know, international viewers, every single platform seems to translate this slightly different. Now,
Mhm.
iQIYI, which is where I watched it because it's the original platform for it, they translate it as how dare you hurt my girl. But if you go into Netflix, for example, I think they've translated it as how dare you hurt my woman. I've seen places where, you know, there's just a variation of this line. And there was quite a bit of debate online because people who were proficient in the language had saying, actually, none of those are quite right. That's not the direct translation of the line. So I did take a screenshot, and we're going to ask Sarah to tell us what the actual line said.
Well, I think this is where, you know, the difference between translation and interpretation is coming in. So the line itself in Chinese is 本座的人你们也敢动, right? So 本座的人is 本座 is what Dongfang Qingchang calls himself. It's like the lofty third person term that he uses. Is very specific to the drama. So very specific to this genre, but it literally means own throne. So he's basically saying like 本座 is like he's way too powerful to just use the word I, right?
Yeah.
Address himself in the first person singular. He's going to do it like the British royal family do, call himself in the third person singular. So the third person singular is own throne, like, so my own throne. So 本座的人. So 本座的人. So the 的人 means like the person that belongs to me. So it's not technically a woman, so there's no 本座的女人, which would be my woman. But then I also think that it would be weird for me as a Chinese speaker for him to say 本座的女人, because like it's enough for him to say it's 本座的人, like she belongs to me.
Yeah.
And the she and the he is kind of like extra. That's my view anyway. I mean, obviously there'll be other people that have different views. So for me, the context of the translation, that she is my woman, is correct, because that's the context I took that line in.
Yeah.
That this is a person that belongs to me. She's mine.
Yeah.
Right? Technically 你也敢动. It's just like, actually technically it's that you dared to move or dare to touch her or dare to so again, to translate that into hurting or harming or like would be correct, even though it's not technically how you would translate. Like dong is to move, not to hurt, but it's one of those things of like, in the context of that line, I think personally that the sub has got it right.
See, I think this is one of those things that is a big difference when it comes to, and I'm not saying Korean is, it kind of is an easier language to grasp, I think. I started learning Korean and I learned the alphabet really, really easily. So I feel like Korean in general is, easier to learn. So the translations seem to be slightly more accurate, although there are things that, are very specific to the Korean language that you just cannot get across into English. And the same goes for Chinese, but I think even more so with Chinese, because it's such a tonal language and it's such a, I keep calling it Chinese, but I mean, Mandarin, but it's such a tonal language that, everybody will kind of interpret it slightly different. The same goes for any Asian language, I think. But I even find this with now, Portuguese and English. There is some things that I cannot translate into English. There's one specific word which, yes, if you type it into Google, it'll tell you that it's supposed to be missing, but that's not the connotation or the feeling that goes behind that word when a Portuguese person speaks it or says it. It's much deeper than that, and you cannot get that across to English. And I feel like that happens I feel like a lot gets lost in translation, between any country. That's just the way it goes when it comes to different languages. For example, I mentioned to you Word of Honor from, was it last year or the year before? It's basically a BL adaptation, and a lot of it is done through using through like symbolism. I can't say that word.
Symbolism.
Yes, that's the word I was trying to say. Using that, or using like poetry to describe things. And actually, one of the things that they use is like the cut sleeve on one of the male robes. Now, I didn't know that that is known to be a symbol of, you know, a gay partnership. And that's context that isn't explained in the subs at all, because, you know, it's something that happens, but it isn't something that, you know, they're necessarily gonna translate, because it's not something that the characters say out loud. It's shown to you. And I feel like, you know, that's the bits that I always say, my superpower, I wish I could instinctively just like understand and read and write any language and speak it, because I feel like that would be such a God-given talent. But yeah, I feel like with Chinese, there's a lot that gets lost in translation, unfortunately. So,
well, I mean, I think some of it is just the necessity of you have to fit the words to the screen, and they cannot be too many of them, and they need to be at a speed that you can read it as a viewer. So, for example, like there's a very famous scene towards the end where Dongfang Qingtang is on a bridge with the goddess, and the translation of it irked me, so I redid it word for word. But there's no way that you could have put word for word translation onto the screen, because it'd have been way too many words, and you couldn't possibly read it all in time. But it was, so you have to obviously always be treading that line between getting the meaning and enough of the context over, but without having to like over complicate it and make it too wordy. But it does kind of hurt you. I'm sure it hurts like the people that do these subs and the translations, that they're not fully getting all of the dialogue and all of the words that you would have access to as a native speaker. So it's not like so I think sometimes it's not that it's difficult to translate, but it's just that the full translation would take too much of the screen. But in general, I'm in huge awe and admiration of people who do subs, because they all seem to do them so quickly as well. Like the turnaround sometimes that you find on Viki is just like, wow, how are they doing all of these things like so quickly and well?
I actually I didn't notice it as much with Korean dramas, but when I started really digging more, you know, for the podcast and stuff like that, that's when I appreciated even more like subbers. And I have a friend, she, funnily enough, also from Hong Kong, but she speaks Mandarin as well. And she she volunteers to do subbing for Viki. And she will go in, and basically she says that a lot of the subs that they get, especially like within the last year, Viki has kind of adapted to buying Chinese dramas with the original subs that, you know, the platforms sort of give. And then the basically the, you know, people who sub for Viki will just go in and they'll clean the subs up, you know, anything that's they think would sound better this way or would be translated better this way, they kind of go in and, you know, do it. And ever since she's been doing that, she kind of like comes back to us and tells us and whatnot which ones she's doing. And I always find fascinating, you know, whenever she's talking about it, because it's one of those things, especially if you're a subber for Netflix, because I've heard that Netflix puts a very strict like amount of words that you can have on screen. So even for Korean, like if you go and watch a drama that's in you know, K-drama, Chinese drama, whatever, that's on Netflix and on Viki, the subs are vastly different, because Viki allows for that flexibility, whereas Netflix doesn't. So
you get context with Viki that you don't. So I generally, if I've got a drama that I can see on Netflix and Viki, I will choose Viki because of the context. So for example, like the standard pickup, like, you know, like the Korean version of like, shall we Netflix and chill, is to would you like a bowl of ramen?
Yeah.
And in Netflix they will literally just translate that. And so you're like, okay, so this dude's just asked like this girl if he wants to go and if she wants to have a bowl of noodles, and now she's like super offended, but I don't know why. But then in Vicky, like you'll get that, you know, that context that they usually put in brackets and italics underneath to say basically this is like a pickup line. So then you realize and you keep it in. So I actually prefer the way that Vicky do it, but I get that, you know, they're probably driving more to an international audience and don't want to put people off that you know, struggle already with subtitles, because you know, some of the really popular Korean dramas have an English dub, right? So I've had friends who've watched Squid Game completely in English dub, which I know, right? I'm just like, why would you do that? I was like, this Korean cast is amazing. Like, you need to listen to their voices, and like, honestly, you can freaking read English. Like, you know, don't do the English dub.
And
they'll
do it like I've stumbled across. Now I can't do it. I cannot. Now this stems from something also. So, you know, growing up as an immigrant in England, I would always have subtitles on everything because that actually helped me to learn English a lot faster. And my brother would instinctively put English subtitles on everything we would watch. Even if it was like English speaking, it would help you to like associate everything. So I've grown up with subtitles, but even in Portugal, nothing gets dubbed except kids programs. You have subtitles on everything. You go to the cinema, there's nothing dubbed. If you jump over into, for example, Spain, I have a couple of friends from Spain. My brother lives in Spain. He grew up in Spain. Everything gets dubbed into Spanish. Everything. So I walked in, my brother came and stayed with us for a while, and he was watching The Simpsons, and I walk in and they're talking Spanish, and I'm like mind blown, because I'm like, no, you can't do that, because to me that just sounds so bizarre. You know, I've always watched with subtitles. And have you seen, like, there's some Netflix programs where they'll do a Korean drama or whatever, and they'll do it with like, they'll dub it with British, you know, really thick accent British people, and I'm like, this it doesn't compute. Like, it makes no sense to do it that way. So I get it. There's some people that's just the way they, you know, want to watch something. For me, I just could never, because I feel like I need to hear it. And my partner will even comment on this. Like, I'll turn it up, and he's like, "Why do you need the volume so high? You can't even understand it." And I was like, I can't understand it, but you, like, even just like emotion that comes out in voice, like you can hear it. I don't have to understand it to like be able to hear what comes from that voice. So it's like language in general. I'm a lover of language, you know. I really enjoy it. It's such a topic that I could talk on it for hours, because it's fascinating to me to find like the different words. There is one thing, right? How do you say tea in Mandarin?
As in a cup of tea?
Yeah, as in just tea in general, like tea, or, you know, a cup of tea.
It's cha.
See, cha. I find this, so in Portuguese, the word, like the sound of it probably will be very different, but it sounds the same. So, because it's chá in Portuguese.
Okay, right.
So whenever I stumbled across that in Chinese dramas, I was like, oh, wait, that sounds similar to something that, you know, I would use, you know, on the daily, because that's, you know, the word that is used in Portuguese. So I find whenever you find those little connections between languages, I just find them, you know, so interesting to, you know, listen and learn more about. But yes, now, complete with, see, I love these discussions because we just get to chat for ages. One of the questions I had, I feel like we've already touched somewhat on it, but what are some of the drawbacks in Chinese dramas? And I know, you know, we've already mentioned, you know, the politics and the censorship. Those are things, unfortunately, we cannot get around. I'm hoping for one day China to be a, you know, freer. And actually, I find it really interesting because Leah mentioned that, you know, some people will just not touch Chinese dramas, and I feel like sometimes I do have that, you know, almost crisis of saying, do I want to watch something that's from out of that country? But I end up loving the entertainment that I get from from them, and I feel like I can watch something and know that, you know, that's not necessarily what's coming out, you know, what's happening in, you know, in the behind the scenes. So yeah, I can totally understand why. But for you specifically, it'd be quite hard to separate the two things, you know, the entertainment and the politics of it, so to speak.
Well, I think that's why the historical dramas is a lot easier for me to lose myself into. So the modern, so the answer I had to this question was actually a question for you. So I'm a huge romance fan. That's kind of like how I came to loving Asian dramas. My first ever K-drama was Crash Landing on You, and I loved it just because, like, there's nothing in Western media that is that kind of tropey and melodramatic, and like just had me. Like, it just had me in a chokehold of emotions. I finished it. I had to immediately rewatch it, and then I had like this crazy massive hangover. So I've tried to find like romance and stuff for Chinese dramas, and I've mentioned this to you in the chat that we have, that obviously I'd actually really like to keep up my Mandarin, so I'd actually really like to see more C dramas. But I found that so I'm somebody who really loves angst in my romance, right? So some of my most favorite K-dramas are ones that are pretty angst heavy and full of black moments, and you know, there's like real danger of it not being a happy ever after an ending. Whereas I found like a lot of Chinese rom-coms or Chinese dramas that are romance heavy tend to be quite low angst.
Yeah.
So like, I think people really like them specifically because they're low angst and they go to them as a kind of a comfort thing. So I think, you know, so I mentioned obviously that I watched You Are My Glory. I found that so super low angst. Like I wasn't really swept away by their romance at any point, because it was kind of like, well, they're going to be together, right? There was like a little bit of like, you know, like a little bit of like they were against each other at the start, but like tiny amounts. So is this kind of like common to Chinese dramas, romance and stuff? Is it generally low angst, or do you just have to know which ones to look for?
I think you have to know which ones to look for. It isn't specifically something that, I think the thing is, what comes out internationally, I mean, they all get released in one way or another, but what becomes big internationally is not necessarily what's big in, you know, China itself. Because I was actually looking at this, and in China, the historicals reign supreme over there. You know, dramas, big dramas like Nirvana in Fire. Now, that is a drama that for me, for a beginner, I would never recommend it. But for you who understands the language, you would be able to keep up with it. And, you know,
it's on my watch list actually, because I know I've heard like such good things about it.
I feel like if you ever watch it, I will watch it with you, because I feel like I need somebody to hold my hand throughout it to really understand it. But for example, Nirvana in Fire is one of the highest rated Chinese dramas in China. But internationally, it did okay. I think it is pretty high, you know, held in high regard, but it's by a specific, you know, group of people, because it's those type of dramas that are really hard to follow in terms of like, there's a lot of moving pieces, and there is a lot of angst, and there is a lot of all of that, you know, things happening. Joy of Life would be another one that, you know, is very highly regarded over there. So I think it depends. I think internationally people tend to gravitate towards the, you know, low angst, very, you know, romancy kind of dramas, but nationally I don't think that's what people gravitate for. And actually, you say you like angst. I mentioned it earlier on. One and Only, very angst, very high angst.
Okay, cool.
It's a historical, and then you have like the Forever and Ever, which is like what I would say is the continuation of the story just in modern times, and that is a lot lower in angst. But the beginning, One and Only, it is tragic, it is beautifully done, and basically the male lead has said that he would never marry, he would never fall in love, because he's a general and he actually has a claim to the throne, and the current emperor kind of like forces him into that position so that he is no longer a threat to the throne. lo and behold, that's not the case. But you know that like he's obviously going to fall in love. It's just the case that he's not going to be able to act on it, and it's very angsty. It's very, you know, emotionally driven. That's one that I absolutely loved, and a lot of people love that one. It's also Bai Lu, and I am known to be a huge Bai Lu fan in general. I just feel like she's very good at what she does. She emotes really beautifully on screen. So yeah, that one is very, very angsty. I'm actually watching one now. It's on air, so I don't know if it's going to change or not. But the main plot of it, it's like it is a modern romance, but it's very different of a modern romance. It is called Forbidden Flower, and it's a romance between an older male and a younger female. But the younger female has, I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but there's something in her past that kind of like creates a lot of angst in their relationship. And but I'm not one that usually goes for, you know, I don't mind angst at all. I just tend to, you know, maybe not watch as many, but this one, it's done so well. The whole vibe of it and the whole like color pattern, they use very like orangey tones and very, it's looking really pretty. Like I said, I haven't finished it because it's still on air, but we shall see where that one goes. So yeah, that is, yeah, angst. I'm gonna look it up and get back to you with a couple more recs.
Great. I still haven't even worked through your other set because we've been discussing this offline. Like
we have
a list that you've given me that I need to get back to.
But definitely, if you watch Nirvana and Fire, give me a shout. I want to watch this one with you. I need somebody to like go back in and be like, I'm lost. I need help. Send help. Because it's one of those. I think it's also one of the highest rated on MDL, which
it is.
Surprises me. So yeah. If you want, actually, I've just thought of one. It's not a drama, it's a movie, so it's really easily digestible. It is a hard watch, but it's so beautifully done. It's called Better Days, and it is the highest rated thing ever on MDL. Out of Korean dramas, it still holds, you know, one of the highest positions, and it's very angst, it's like this beautiful coming of age story of like these two people who are in very difficult, you know, positions, and yeah, it's their story, and I definitely recommend that one. And I think that one's available in quite a few places, I believe. So yeah, that one's very angst, but like I said, it's one of those where I was like glued to the screen the whole time that, you know, it was on. So yes, that's that. So what else have I got for questions? I think I've only got one question left. So if you were to create your own drama, which elements from Chinese dramas and which elements from Korean dramas would you pull together?
So it's probably a summary of everything we've talked about.
Yeah,
I would actually really love Korean. I mean, so I find generally I do really like historical dramas. Like historical romance for me is like is my favorite go-to genre. But generally in Korean dramas, their historical dramas, their chosen dramas generally tend to be quite court politics heavy. They're kind of similar to some Chinese court dramas that are all kind of like, this concubine is kind of like warring with like this, like the queen, and then the dowager queen is like all meddling and blah blah blah. And so I'm a little bit like, oh, I don't know if I could do another one of these. Oh, I have to be in the right mood for it.
Yeah.
I would love to see. So it would be interesting to see whether or not Alchemy of Souls, which we talked about earlier today, and likely I have not actually yet seen, whether or not that actually kind of like proves a bit of us, because it was very successful, serves as a bit of a springboard into more of Korean dramas being more historical fantasy. And kind of leaving behind some of that court-related, chosen kind of like court drama stuff, and actually just creating like a whole different world that is rooted in like Korean history, but is you know, effectively a historical, a completely new fantasy like world that they build, you know, that's unique.
See, for me, I have always had a slight problem with Korean fantasy in general. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't click for me as well. Now, Alchemy of Souls, I wish I had loved it better. And it wasn't the acting. I love the acting. The CGI, it looked expensive. It looks gorgeous. My problem was the writing. It
Yeah.
is the writing that let the story down for me. And what I find in terms of Chinese dramas, yes, they are very long, but because like when you come to Chinese fantasy specifically, it's rooted in something. So they can pull from this, pool of knowledge and mythology and whatnot. And even with Chinese historicals, they've got something that, they've got lots of dynasties to go through. You've got your Tang dynasty, and now that's the only one I'm remembering. Great. Great stuff. But there's, a lot of dynasties.
The Ming, the Qing,
the Ming,
yeah, the Song,
yes.
yeah.
There's so many. And like every dynasty is very different. So they can pull from a lot of history. Whereas Korea doesn't have quite as a large history to pull from, and especially when it comes to like their mythology. I don't know a lot about Korean mythology as much, but the problem for me was like the Hong sisters in general, they either land or they don't land for me, and they've kind of been more of a miss lately. And with Alchemy of Souls, you need like years to build a story like this from scratch. And I feel like they didn't quite have the time to like build the story fully. But I'll be really interested to see what, like, when Leah and, if you come around to watch it as well, like what your guys' thoughts are on it. Yeah, there was quite a lot of discussion about it. And unfortunately, it led to a bit of a, in-house fighting, so to speak, which was just like sad to see, because I'm like, are we really at that point where we still have to be like, oh no, Korean dramas are better, oh no, Chinese dramas are better? I'm
exactly.
Like, just watch it all, just watch what you want to watch, enjoy it. It's meant to be for entertainment. I said it, my last guest podcast, because we spoke about this, but Jess from the Daybuck podcast, she's just released her Alchemy of Souls episodes, and she mentions in her first episode of that she got, she did a couple of reels for TikTok and whatnot, and she basically got like, threats and whatnot going at her just because her commentary on Alchemy of Souls wasn't a positive one. And I'm like, really? Do we really? She went through like quite a horrible time, and I feel like it was unwarranted, very, very unwarranted, because all she was doing was stating her opinion, and everybody. I don't like it when fandoms get like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's it's not a good environment to be in. So for K-drama, I think again, I think you and I have been chatting a little bit on via Instagram on the recent K-drama that's dropped that everybody loves, which is a 10-episode I Love to Hate You.
Oh, Love to Hate You. Yeah.
And whether or not C-dramas, because obviously they're known for their length, whether or not they have any ones that are kind of like super short and they're just kind of like, this is our story, we're going to focus on our story, we're going to tell our story, and not have like tragic backstories and lots of other extra characters and etc. Or are they generally like they have to be a certain length?
So I find that, for example, thrillers and crime dramas, they tend to be 12 to 16 episodes. They tend to be a lot shorter. Romance, it can vary. It just varies really on, So basically, what happens is, for Chinese dramas, the more episodes they have, the more revenue they can get out of a drama. So, and that's why it's all money at the end of the day. That's why they want to tack on those episodes, because they have more, they can put in more adverts, they can put in more of this, more of that, and basically they can get a bigger return. Now, what I've seen happen in the last year, and that makes me really excited for the year coming and what we're going to see out of Chinese drama land, is the fact that beforehand China would concentrate on quantity over quality. So you would get a lot of dramas constantly being pumped out, but none of them had like any real substance to them. Now, over the last, 6 months, especially, we've seen a big shift in that. Whereas, companies have been started to concentrate more on quality over quantity, and that's where you're getting Love Between Fairy and Devil. You're getting New Life Begins was a really big one last year. Lighter and Princess was a really big one last year. And then in January we've just had the drama Meet Yourself, which was huge drama. That drama holds a very, very special place in my heart, because it's like I would get home from work and it's like the way that I describe Meet Yourself, it's like it's a hug, and that's what that drama is. But that's the 40 episode, but I sat there and I was like, I love every single one of these episodes. But for example, Love Between Fairy and Devil, 36 episodes for a xianxia. That's insane, because that's unheard of.
It's really tightly done. Yeah.
It's unheard of. Now, the two current, I'm watching 2 xianxias right now. Both of them are only 40 episodes. They don't go above. Now, people will hear that. They're like, oh my God, that's so many episodes. But for the type of drama it is, that's a big reduction. And you've been seeing dramas getting shorter and shorter, I think, because they are, and I think it stems from the fact that they are trying to concentrate more on quality over quantity, which I'm totally here for. It's a great move on their part to do. But yeah, typically, and also you do have like what they call, everything's a web drama in general, but you do have these very, very short dramas, which are like only 10 minutes an episode, and they will be very, very short. Their quality not guaranteed at all, but they do exist. They're just there's even ones that are like, they're made to be watched on phones. So they're only about like 2 minutes an episode. So you get a whole story, in about 3 hours worth of drama, you get a whole story told. And that's very fast paced, because, there's only 3 hours to tell you a whole story. It's like movies, but they break them up into like really short episodes for some reason. But yeah, there's definitely a shift happening, and there's so many dramas that are coming out that I'm very excited for. It's just a fact that, with Chinese drama land, you just never know when they're gonna come, because, they don't tell you. They just airdrop stuff out of the blue, or they tell you like 2 days before or anything like that. But yeah. So I think that's actually all of my questions. Oh, I do have something. I have like 3 Chinese words for the fantasy and whatnot. Some of them you've already said, but I want to hear them, like you saying them, so I can like pronounce them properly sometime.
Sure. So, I mean, very happy to do this. So actually we touched on this before with the Chinese language. So just a very quick 101. Obviously, that there are 4 tones in Mandarin, but as an English speaker often approaching Chinese language, they will think of a word having the same word having 4 tones. So the classic one that people learn is ma. So you'd say it ma, 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 ma. That would be the 4 tones.
Okay.
And an English speaker will kind of think of it as ma. So ma, the word ma, but you have to learn how to say it in ma, 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 like 4 different tones. But the way you need to approach it slightly is to think of it as a Chinese person would think of it, which is that these 4 words are not the same word with 4 different tones. They are 4 completely different words.
Okay.
That just phonetically sound the same, because obviously a Chinese person's not going to sit there going, that's ma with the first tone, or that's like ma with the first tone, or ma with the second tone, or ma with the third tone. Like, to them, they are completely different words. So those are the 4 tones. Cantonese is worse. Cantonese is 7 tones. So like you're actually easier to learn. It's actually easier to learn Mandarin tones anyway. And I would also say, because I think you mentioned that Korean might be a little bit easier. I think my understanding is that Korean grammar is more complicated than Chinese grammar. Chinese grammar is
Really?
really simple. Like, especially for you as a European, like Romanic language speaker,
Mm-hmm.
you will have like 60 different ways to conjugate a verb. You will have like masculine and feminine, and like
Yeah.
if you're fucking German, you've got like neuter as well. We have none of those concepts in Chinese language, and we do not conjugate verbs. So all of our verbs are context specific. So you learn one word, like for example, to sing, and all of the context is in like yesterday I sing. So you just say sing instead of saying having to learn how to say yesterday I sung, or tomorrow I am singing. You just say tomorrow I sing. So you just use exactly the same verb,
Oh.
but you just put the context around, like, so it's so much easier. You don't have to be learning all of these really weird and wonderful ways to conjugate verbs. So my sell on Chinese, like, because once you've got over the tones and the characters, which are the major stumbling blocks to Chinese, it's actually quite an easy language to learn. I actually think it's easy, and I've tried to learn a bit of Korean. I did a year worth of Japanese. I actually genuinely think Chinese is easier to learn, but it's just that stumbling block of the tones. But again, the tones, you just kind of have to think of it as characters rather than, I've got to learn this word in so many different tones. And also you can mangle tones quite, like, the other thing is, like, China's such a big country, so lots of us have our own accents, as we've discussed. So I mangle tones all the time. Like, my tones, sometimes I drop into Cantonese tones, but people will still understand me from the context of what I'm saying.
Okay.
And the kind of like more or less the sound that you're making. So you also shouldn't sweat tunes too much as well. Like, you can get them, especially as a person that's learning Chinese, you'll get given a lot of leeway in, like, in not getting the tones right. So anyway, to go back to your Chinese drama words at 101. So I think you had down xian xia, which is, so xian is the first tone, so it's xian xia, which is the second tone. So it's first and second. So xian xia. So an X. Yeah, an X and an I sound is like a Xi sound, like, so Xi Jinping. So a lot of people struggle with the X, but just think of it as an SH sound. So it's Xi.
Xi.
Yeah.
Xi.
So
okay.
Xian, so xian. So the A and N is more like an E and an N. So it said xian xia. So that's obviously our historical fantasy.
Yes.
Whereas where xian is like the heavenly realm, and xia is the warrior and the hero. And then wu xia, so wu is the third tone. So we're getting all the tones here, I think. So the symbol for a third tone is like an upside down chevron. So it starts up high, goes down low, and goes back up like a V.
Okay.
It's like a V.
Yeah.
So you say it like a V. So it goes down. So it's woo, and you go back up.
Ah.
So you can kind of picture it as a third tone. So wu xia.
Wu xia.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank you. Can you just become my teacher? You could just teach me.
You could, yeah. There's so many good Chinese teachers and online actually that you can get. One of the things that I keep saying when I'm like a bit more, when I'm retired and I have more time, is to go back and find, like, people to up my have more advanced Chinese lessons with.
Well, if you've got any suggestions to, like, where to go, send them my way, because I said this year is the year that I really want to try and
learn,
and the thing is, I was learning Korean, but now that I'm doing the podcast and my podcast is shifted towards Chinese dramas, I really just want to do them like the words justice, and like, I don't want to butcher the language half the time. So I was like, I really want to try, like, this is one of my aims for this year, is to try and learn. But I find, like, I feel like I need to learn from somebody, because, like, you've got all of these apps like Duolingo and stuff like that, and I feel like that's not necessarily the place to learn from, so to speak.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And then I think the last one is actually a term that I don't actually know, so I had to look this up because I think it's more of a relatively recent historical fantasy with foreign elements, right?
Yes, that's how I've been, like, how I've learned it, is that it is like fantasy, but it's set like outside of China with foreign elements almost. So yeah, it's a term that doesn't get used very often, but yeah.
So it's Xuan Huan. So Xuan is a second tone. I'm probably mangling this as well because I don't know it. So it's but it's second tone Xuan. So Xuan Huan, and Huan is the fourth tone. So the fourth tone is the most abrupt tone. And actually this is where the symbols do help because it's a slanted line downwards. So you say this one quite quick. So you go Huan, and it just chops it off at the end. So
I've now just hearing you speak, I've now got a question. So when you write out Mandarin, let's go with Mandarin. When you write out Mandarin, do you call it symbols or letters? I don't know.
Characters.
Characters, right?
Yeah.
So do the characters kind of set the? So you were saying, for example, with the V sound almost. Does that do they show you like what tone you're supposed to be saying in? Because you were saying it's supposed to start higher and go lower. Oh no.
And that's the unfortunate thing about Chinese. That's why learning Chinese, the biggest stumbling block is its characters, and they are pictorial, like they're kind of pictographs, so they won't give you the phonetic pronunciation. So in some ways the pro of them is that they're actually quite flexible to learn across Asia. So for example, like in Japan, they use as a subset, so they have hiragana and katakana, which are their kind of their phonetic alphabet, romanized ways of speaking Japanese, but they'll also use kanji, which are the Chinese characters, and the meaning of the Chinese characters remain the same. So like when I'm traveling around Japan, I will be able to find, so like I know which one's the female toilet and the male toilet because they use exactly the same Chinese character, but they will say it in a completely different way because obviously they'll say it in Japanese and I will say it in Chinese. And the same thing I think it's reduced now in Korea, but like Korea obviously has Chinese characters traditionally in its language, and again the meaning is the same, but the sound that they make to say it is completely different. And the same thing in Chinese with the Chinese dialects. So for example, randomly, lots of countries in the world were given their names, their phonetic kind of Chinese translations from the Cantonese. So for example, I find this really random, like Greece in Chinese is Xila, which kind of doesn't sound anything like why it's like, it doesn't really make sense why it would be Xila, because that sounds nothing like Greece.
Like Greece, yeah.
Actually, if you say exactly the same characters in Cantonese, it's Helap. And Helap is obviously Hellas, which is what Greek people call Greece. So it's actually been translated, but so even within the same country, the characters are said differently depending on what language you're speaking of it. But you will all be able to understand each other. So in my example of like people being mutually unintelligible between Cantonese and Mandarin, if they only spoke to each other, wrote letters to each other, they would totally understand each other because the written language is exactly the same.
Okay.
Because it's all based on characters and the meaning of the characters. It doesn't give you phonetics. There are some elements that are phonetic, so you'll see something that you think, that's like an ang ending because it's got this particular stroke character order in. But other than that, you just have to kind of memorize the characters, and you need 10,000 to read a Chinese newspaper. So
my God.
That is the stumbling. That's the stumbling block. Yeah.
Definitely. I feel like it's a project that will take lots and lots of years to perfect, so to speak. But it is doable. Like, it's not an impossible mission. It's doable. So you just kind of have to like set your mind to it. And there is this random topic here, but there is this TikToker that I follow, and she speaks Mandarin fluently, and one of the things that she does is she travels around China and she tries lots of different foods. And a lot of the time she will literally just walk into a restaurant and she'll be like, obviously speaking perfect Mandarin. I mean, to me it sounds good. I don't know how good it actually is, but people are usually quite impressed with her Mandarin. And she will just ask the waiter, what do you suggest? And she will just eat whatever the waiter suggests. And I love watching her, her videos, because she's very appreciative of the food and the culture that comes behind it, and I feel like she can grasp it way better and travels to she can go to like these very small places and get around very easily because she knows the language. So, but she is pretty young, and I'm like, I believe she has no parents that are from, China or anything. I think she's either Australian or she's from New Zealand. It's one of the two countries. And, so what I mean by that, it's doable. It's just something that you kind of have to set your mind to and be like, right, I need to, focus on it.
And you could always decide that you're just going to concentrate on being able to speak and understand it and not bother about the writing system. Like, you don't need to know the writing system in order to be able to learn how to speak and understand Chinese. But yeah, I would say that the hurdles are higher at the start, but like I said, it kind of rewards you because you also don't have to have, like, there's different politeness levels, and that will change like how a verb or how you'd use your language in Korean and Japanese, but we don't really have that in Chinese.
Oh, that's great.
We'll have some words that there's politer ways of saying things, just like there is in English, but there's not a whole new grammar system and a whole new set of like verb endings or word endings that you have to add to things to get to those different levels of politeness.
Okay. Well, that actually has helped me because I thought it sounds more daunting than it actually is once you kind of get stuck into it and, just sort of focus on it. So, for the last little bit, I thought we'd just talk about some like recommendations and things. I actually really want some recommendations from you for, either movies or dramas out of Hong Kong, because I haven't watched any and I've heard that they are very, very different. But also, I feel like people always say it's so hard to suggest something because people will say, oh, what should I start with for, Chinese dramas if they're coming from Korean dramas? And I always tend to ask, what are some of your favorite Korean dramas? And then I will recommend according to that, because at least then you're like within the same, ballpark of, enjoyment or whatever. But what would be some of your recommendations, I would say?
So given that you are quite a historical fantasy fan, I think I would say that it's probably commonly acknowledged that Hong Kong dramas and movies are not where they used to be in the heyday, right? Like, it's like we had our golden period, and I think it's kind of accepted that we're not probably going to get back to there. And obviously they will begin to have censorship to their media and content that certainly wasn't there when I was growing up. So I think probably my suggestion is apparently this man has sold more books than Shakespeare.
Oh gosh, really?
He's an author called Jin Yong, or Gum Yong is how I know him. That's the Cantonese way. In Louis Cha is like, he's got like a romanized, westernized name. But he has a set of wuxia novels that have been adapted like countless times into many, many different versions. So like even within. So it's not even that every generation gets a new one. It's almost like every 5-6 years there's a new version of his books and his classics. So I would recommend, there's quite a few, but it's probably, I'm going to say in Cantonese, it's Yiting Tolongge, which is translated as Heavenly Sword and Dragon Slaying Saber.
Why does this sound familiar? This sounds familiar to me.
So it's I'll send you the links, but they've done multiple versions. The one that I absolutely love is actually the one I already referenced, which was the part Taiwanese, part Hong Kong production. And the voice dub for the male lead on that was like, he's just so amazing. He makes the hero just so like hero like and just really lovable. But it's quite angsty as well. So there is lots of stuff in there that's he has to go through quite a lot. The leads have to go through quite a lot to be together. But because this is all kind of like loosely correlated series of books that he's written, he's created an entire world in this wuxia kind of kingdom, which has actually been taken on as like the common world building place. So even series that aren't written by him will often now use kind of terms and things that he's come up with because everyone's so familiar with them. So, there are martial artists who are nuns. There are martial artists that are monks. So you have the Shaolin monks, but then you also have the Taoist Tai Chi masters, and they'll all be different warriors. And so this is a whole kind of a whole world that he's built within these novels that are then commonly drawn on through this set of set of novels. So obviously China's done plenty of its adaptations as well. I think it's the most recent one was in 2019. I don't know how many versions. There are like so many different versions.
What was it called? What was the Chinese version called? Do you know the 2019 one?
I'm trying to just look it up. So this one is actually the Heavenly Sword and Dragon Slaying Saber is the way they've translated it into. And yeah, and it is just taken the name from the novel. So it's Yi Tin Tong. Yeah.
See, that does sound. See, because that sounds familiar. I feel like I've heard. I haven't watched it, but please do send me the link because if I can find it on, you know, somewhere to watch subbed, I will definitely want to check it out and see where it's coming from. So yeah, I thought I would just finish because this. Leah obviously had to leave, but this would have been a good one for her because I've got a couple of suggestions that I always tend to do. And I gave the same suggestions. I did an episode with Lola from Lola Pops Off about K-dramas, and these were like some of the, like, I didn't say suggestions, but some of my favorites in terms of, you know, Chinese dramas in the last couple of years. And I kind of did it in terms of, I divided them by what's the word, by genre, so there'd be something in there for kind of everybody. Yeah. And so the first one that I did for thriller, kind of like time loop, I've already mentioned it earlier in the episode, and that's the drama from last year, Reset. Highly recommend it. It's 16 episodes. It's very tightly told in terms of story. The main couple in it, so basically there's these two people and they get on the bus and the bus is going along and whatnot, and then it gets to this bridge and it blows up. And then the female lead wakes up again on the same bus. And it's basically a time loop. And what they have to do is they have to figure out why the bus is blowing up. And they have to figure out, you know, why she basically is stuck in this time loop. And then she's able to bring in the male lead into the time loop. So it's like, it was really, really big last year. It did, you know, big splash last year. Again, only 16 episodes, so it is a pretty good one. And then, obviously, you've watched it. I'm sure many people have watched it because I feel like this is the one that has brought so many people in, and that is Love Between Fairy and Devil. You know, it is epic fantasy, Chinese drama at its best in terms of that genre, I think. But if we were to go, I would also then suggest it's an earlier drama and it's called The Legends. Now, The Legends is slightly longer. I think it's 58 episodes. But the thing with The Legends is, and the reason why I suggest it, I really enjoyed it at the time. It's not, you know, the best well done drama. There's Shantra that is, you know, much better. I really loved Ashes of Love, for example, but that's way longer. But The Legends is written or based on the same source material as Love Between Fairy and Devil. So the same author wrote the two books that the dramas were based on, and you can definitely see like similarities between the two. So the male lead in The Legends is basically, he's like the son of the devil and he's like locked up in this cage, in this cave, and the female lead kind of like accidentally releases him. So is it sounding similar?
Sounds similar, yeah.
The story then gets taken in a very different path because, you know, there's, you know, they both very much can feel and whatnot. And actually, there is a ghost in it because the female lead in that drama does die almost, and she comes back as a ghost. So there is, you know, we were speaking about it earlier on, but there is that in there. And then for Found Family, now this is a drama that's very near to my heart because I absolutely loved it, and it's the drama Go Ahead. Now, Go Ahead is basically I always caveat this drama by saying all the mothers are horrible. All the mothers are horrible. but the father's in this. It's basically like an upstairs dad and a downstairs dad, and they kind of, there's 3 kids between the 2 of them. One of them is adopted, and the other 2 are like, you know, one's from the upstairs neighbor, one's from the downstairs, and they kind of create a found family between them. And the downstairs dad is basically, to this day, still my favorite drama dad of all time. He's very caring. He shows his love through food, and you know, he listens to his kids, and all he wants is, like, you know, all 3 of them, even the ones that aren't, the 2 that aren't his, all he wants is for them to be happy. And you know, he's just very, he's like the best dad ever. So yeah, and there's like talk in that drama of, you know, mental health, and one of the characters has problems with it. And so yeah, this is actually the drama where remember I mentioned that friend from Hong Kong. I suggested this to her, and this was kind of what brought her back into Chinese dramas.
Oh, right.
So it's one of those that I really, really love it. And the one that I mentioned to you earlier, One and Only and Forever and Ever, you know, those 2 are also very, very good. One and Only is, you know, tragic, historical, but so beautifully done. So beautifully done. And actually, One and Only is only 24 episodes, and they're only about 40 minutes per episode. So you could, in theory, call it a 16-episode K-drama. If the episodes are about an hour and 10 for a K-drama, you could almost, you know, say the same or equivalent. But those would, it's always so hard to suggest dramas. Those are like some of my all-time favorites, I would say.
I was gonna ask you about one. So you know that because on my Instagram I've been rewatching one of my all-time favorites, which is I Am Not a Robot.
Yes.
And this could potentially be a contender for the thing that we said we'd watch as Chinese and an English Chinese and a Korean remake of, because they remade it in a Chinese drama.
I've watched it.
Yeah.
I think I've watched the Chinese.
I'm going to ask you. So it's a robot in the Orange Orchard is the.
Yes, I have watched it. Yes. How do I say? The story is done okay, but I feel like the Korean version was done better than the Chinese version. Yeah. So if you really love the Korean drama, you probably won't enjoy as much. The Chinese version is also longer. Yeah. I believe, and I think the acting in it wasn't as good as I wished it had been, but it was still enjoyable. It's just that on that aspect, I feel like the Korean version took it. And what I would say is, Korean dramas, one thing that I love about them is like their depth of emotion. They emote so well on screen. Like their emotion just comes through the screen. And that, it happens in, you know, Chinese dramas as well. It's sometimes just not as, it just doesn't land as well in Chinese dramas, I would say. There was one that I recently started watching, and I said that it was, you know, Go Ahead, for example. I just mentioned it, but Go Ahead is one of those where there's scenes that are very, very emotionally charged, and the actors just push, you know, pull through it completely. For example, there's one scene where they're having like a family gathering, and the downstairs father kind of says something about one of the kids that isn't his biological kid, and the family is like, why do you even, you know, why are you even being opinionated or anything like that? And the kid literally turns, he's now I think a teen or an adult, and he says, no, that's my father, regardless of it being biological or not. That is my father. I care about us. And it's one of those scenes that is very small, but the emotional impact of it delivered by the actors worked so well that, you know, I really, really, really enjoyed that. But yes, I have watched the Chinese version, and it doesn't land quite as well as the Korean version, I don't think.
And actually, I saw you tweet about this. The other thing that I'm watching live is Our Blooming Youth as a Korean drama, which is a remake, right, of a Chinese drama that never got shown.
So, but there has been news. Basically, what happened was the Chinese drama for it is called The Golden Hairpin. And it has Yang Zi in it, and Yang Zi is basically, she was the female lead in Ashes of Love, which was my very first Chinese drama. So she's kind of like, you know, a special actress to me because it was my very first Asian drama, and I was very excited for this one. Now, the reason why that it won't air anytime soon is because the male lead in it is Chris Wu. I don't know if you heard what happened with him, you know, charged with sexual assault, with rape, with drugs, bunch of stuff. So he's in prison. So he's like, obviously nobody is going to want to watch that male lead. Now, what they are doing is that they are replacing the male lead. They want to bring that drama out. So they're either going to CGI, I don't know if they'll work. It has happened. It has happened in the past, and it's been done pretty well. They're either going to CGI the, you know, another male lead into the drama, or they will, you know, reshoot scenes, or, you know, whatever. I think they want to make it work because it's a really high budget drama, and they will want to make their, you know, return on it, so to speak. It was really anticipated. Like, I really wanted to watch it, but obviously I don't want to watch it with that male lead in, because you don't, that's just not going to happen. But yes, so Our Blooming Youth is actually based on The Golden Hairpin, which is a Chinese drama. This one would be a brilliant one for us to do our comparisons, because they would obviously, when Korea was adapting, they would adapt it to Joseon Dynasty, whereas you know, that's not the case for the Chinese version. Unfortunately, I don't know, I think we will see it. It's just a case of, you know, how long will it be before they can actually, you know, do all the work on it. So yeah.
The other one would be the Mr. Queen original. Actually, that would be interesting.
That one I would be really, really interested in doing, because I haven't watched the Chinese one. I think it's called Go Princess Go.
Yeah.
So that one would be really, really interesting for us to do. I feel like, so guys, stay tuned. I'm sure we will be doing an episode like this where, you know, the three of us will be back discussing the differences between two dramas that have been adapted from either one country or the other. So that would, I reckon that would be a great episode to do. So yes, I think that is everything. That's been a great, I feel like I always love doing guest episodes because I walk away with like different perspectives and just having learned a lot, especially like having you on, because obviously you know the language, and that, you know, in itself aids a lot. But yes, it's been wonderful to have you guys. Thank you so much for coming on, Sarah.
You're welcome. I've had a great time too. So thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, and I'm sure she's not here anymore, but thank you, Leah, because I'm sure she'll listen later on. It's been wonderful, and I'm sure there will be another. I feel like this is the start, like Leah said, the start of a great friendship where we'll be doing lots more together, hopefully. So that's it for this episode. Thank you, and signing out.
This has been another episode of the Tea and Soju Asian Drama Podcast. I'm your host, Liliana, and you can come and chat to me on Instagram, Tea and Soju Pod, all one word, and on Twitter, tea_soju_pod. You can also email me at teaandsojupodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to support this podcast, please consider joining Patreon for extra content. Lastly, if you enjoy this podcast, please help by rating and reviewing wherever you listen to help others find this drama corner. I'll leave everything linked in the description notes. See you next time for more Asian drama chatter.